It's a beautiful Thursday morning, today the 23rd of May 2024. Good morning and welcome to the Dailies on Echo Television, where we keep you updated with all that's happening from the Nigerian newspaper. Remember, you can be part of the program by joining us via Facebook and YouTube. Drop your comment and your views concerning any of the story that is of interest to you. I am Sada Elisha Dasham, and of course, I will be doing the program together with Rachel Tanzi. Good morning.
Morning, Sarah.
How you doing?
I'm fine. How about you?
I'm great, thank you so much. All right, we shall move straight into the paper, starting with the leadership newspaper. The big story on the leadership: hard times for businesses, where we have 21 companies shut down in Kano in 3 years. Stakeholders blame epileptic power supply, multiple taxes, and counterfeiting. We are aware of only 4 companies that moved to Ogun. This is coming from the Kano government. More detail found on page 4. And on May 29, federal government opts for low-key celebration. Bandits attack Plateau, calm and peaceful. This is coming from Governor Mutfwan. You can find more detail of that on page 16. And what's trending on the paper, we have Tinubu condoles with Iran over Risi's death. And then we have 9 financial institutions pay 678 million naira fines in 2023. Forex crisis: CBN blames BDC's June 3rd deadline to get new licenses. Fixed 2 billion naira, 500 million naira capital requirements. Detail found in the paper. Federal government apologizes over hardship, defense economic policies. You can find that in the paper as well. Abba Kyari granted 2-week bail to bury mother. We are tired of federal government deception. This is coming from ASU. And we have 17 months after abducted Zamfara lawmakers' daughters rescued. And we have Jaiz Bank grows profit before tax to 11.2 billion naira. More detail found in the paper. We have a picture story where we can see the former President Olusegun Obasanjo, the Vice President Kashim Shettima, and then we also have Ford Foundation, Diren Walker, the former President Nigeria Bar Association Abubakar, and the Executive Director Trust Bank, and the other summit. I think this was during the summit on the state of democracy in Africa held in Abuja yesterday. You can do well to grab the paper, read more detail of any of the story that is of interest to you.
On Blueprint newspaper, go with medication. Nakan tells pilgrims with underlying ailments. You can find details on page 7. After 27 months in detention, DCP Kyari gets 2-week bail. Nigeria's financial strength, second best in Africa, a report from IMF. On World Cup, will be South Africa, Benin Republic, Finidi assures. You can find details on page 33. Yakubu to SIECs stop coronating ruling parties candidates in LG polls. Urges governors to allow electoral bodies independent. You can start with the details on the front page and continue on page 8. Military not profiting from terrorism, Defense Headquarters counters Katsina governor. Details can be found on the front page and continue inside the paper. The big story on Blueprint: Tinubu's renewed hope agenda working. Statement from Akume. 1-year anniversary will be low-key, says Information Minister. Chinese firm seeks partnership with federal government on CNG vehicles. Jaiz Bank posts 11.2 billion naira profit before tax. Details can be found on page 19. LCCI calls for fiscal interventions to boost food production. The last story on the paper: UNICEF reaffirms safety of human papillomavirus vaccine. You can find details on page 13. This is concerning cancer, and that's all the news on Blueprint newspaper.
On the Guardian newspaper, 18-year-old construction work from 9 billion naira in 2006 abandoned National Library to cost over 200 billion naira. More detail found in the paper. CBN reduces duty FX rate 18 times in May as Naira trades above 1,005 to a dollar. More detail can be found on page 18. Lagos Correctional Center overstretched by 104%. This is coming from the government of Lagos State. INEC knocks SIEC likens council poll to coronation of candidates. First year in office, federal government eyes low-key ceremony gives Tinubu pass mark. And we have Nigerians creamstone export hit $15.2 million, securing 30th place globally. Abba Kyari gets bail after 27 months in detention. Tinubu Obasanjo seek regional integration to deepen democracy. And here, federal government says negotiation is for minimum wage, not living wage. Offers 57,000. We had initially 54,000 yesterday, and after the meeting, we've added a little money on top. That's like added like 3,000, and here we're having 57,000 naira. You can find more detail of the news on page 6, and that's all on the Guardian newspaper.
On Vanguard newspaper, Europa League final, Lookman's hat-trick clinch historic win for Atalanta. You can find details on page 5. The big story, minimum wage talks, Labour cuts demand to 497,000 naira. Federal government OPS offer 57,000 naira. Yesterday's talks end in stalemate, and Uzodinma attends briefly as other governors shun minimum wage talks. On Edo Guba, Bishop Omede to lead Labour Party's campaign council for Apata. Details can be found on page 7. Obaseki signs 404 billion naira revised 2024 budget into law. EFCC NBA move to tackle lawyers aiding criminals to launder illicit funds. Details can be found on page 9. On currency crisis, UK varsity sends Nigerians packing. Reps query contractors over abandoned project after 85% payment. Reform policies have attracted FDI, reduced inflation. A statement coming from the federal government. You can find details on page 9. Solution to bad governance in Africa is more democracy. A statement from Tinubu. You can find details on page 26. Finidi to Super Eagles, Nigeria bigger than your club. Details can be found on page 29. And according by Olufasan on page 15. And that's all the news on Vanguard newspaper.
On Dailies newspaper, government bans smoking money ritual in Nigerian films. You can find more detail of that on page 4. The big story on the paper, federal government apologizes over hardship, says policy necessary already yielding results. Well, I hope that Nigerians will say the same. I think May 29 is when our president will be celebrating 1 year fully in office, Rachel, when he was being sworn in as the president of the country. And I'll also say that it will also be 1 year when Nigerians will also be marking 1 year of hardship ever since the removal of fuel subsidies. So nevertheless, it won't be surprising the government is apologizing over hardship, because we know that ever since he was sworn into office, the policies he has made has only been painful. Of course, it may look like, just like you keep saying sometimes, it might look like it's a long-term policy that we might not enjoy the fruits right now, and it might take a while. But then while we're waiting for that fruits eventually, Rachel, we should see something that will give us a hope, something to hold on to. Yesterday on the show, we were looking at the CBN's new interest rate. They have increased. Remember, they had a meeting, so the meeting held on Tuesday, and then that was when we had the new, and they increased about 150% to the basic, whatever points, they do, basic point. And then here we've seen that it's about 26.25%, so that like 26.3. Now that will cause more hardship for investors, businesses will be complaining. And I think one of the papers this morning we're seeing where people are complaining. The reason why certain companies are leaving Kano is because of the epileptic power supply we're having. And we will record that we've seen multinationals also leaving the country because of the same problem, which happens to be power. And now we've seen our federal government apologize. And I know that Nigerians are tired of hearing this apology. We are tired. Nigerians will just hope that, you know what, rather than the apology, why don't we see something better? Let's even start from the minimum wage we're seeing. It keeps moving as if we are bargaining for a pair of shoe. When the owner will tell you, no, this shoe goes for 40,000, I said, okay, please, can we take it? And then this is how we keep going back and forth, back and forth. And yesterday on Nigeria Now, we were saying something concerning the fact, okay, why don't we just have a flat payment for everybody? From the executive down to everybody. Because if you're saying that, I mean, civil servants should go home with 54,000. Right now, we're having 57,000. Maybe our senators should also go with the same amount. Then we know that, okay, everybody's going home with it. Because they're also public servants, whether you like it or not. They're also public servants. So, I mean, looking at this apology, well, let us hope that the policies will eventually yield results at the presidency.
I mean, Stella, there is an adage in Hausa, but I'll say it in English. If the person speaking is a fool, the person listening is not a fool. If the federal government talking are foolish, Nigerians listening are not foolish. There is no how you will give an administration a pass and apologize at the same time. These two things don't go together. I can't say sorry if I haven't offended you. So you must have offended someone, first of all, before you say sorry. So I don't understand how the same federal government is saying the Tinubu's 1 year is a pass, policies are good, things are moving on well. I even saw on the previous paper where they're talking about inflation being minimal. And then you're apologizing for hardship. How is that possible if everything is well? Why are you apologizing for hardship? If you're giving an administration a pass, then what is the apologies for? Why is there hardship if the administration is doing well? So why are we having contradictory statements from the federal government? You are already saying the truth out there, that is, there is hardship. And the first 1 year have been just nothing but hardship. How can you talk about inflation that keeps increasing massively and is the reason that we are having our MPR going high because of the tight monetary policy by the Central Bank of Nigeria? So whether we like it or not, once inflation goes, our MPR have to follow suit. There's no magic. There's nothing that the Central Bank can do based on the kind of policy they are running when it comes to the monetary system of the country and all of that. You are looking at fuel pump price getting to almost 1,000. When there was scarcity, we had it getting up to 1,000 naira. It's now at 900. In some places you can get it still 800, 700 in some very few places, but that is not the case for a lot of people. We are seeing the games you are playing with our currency. We are seeing it. And whatever magic you tried doing with it didn't work, because now it's going back to where it was. It's now above 1,500 to $1 and all of that. And then you are saying it's a pass. You are clapping hands and then you are apologizing on the other side. We are then supposed to be the one clapping for you and apologizing for thinking you're not going to do anything. Why are you still the one apologizing? So we just have to wait for the next 1 year again, Sele. That's the only hope Nigerians have. If it is the past 1 year, it was very disappointing. Extremely, exceedingly disappointing, if I must put it that way. But let's wait and see. And I don't just know how the federal government is going to pull it off concerning our currency valuation, Sele, because that is my major concern. If we can only see our naira stabilizing, I was thinking the CBN will be able to maintain it at 1,127 naira, but we are seeing now going high above 1,500. And whether we like it or not, this is going to mean a lot for us. Yes, very soon we are looking at the first batch of Dangote's fuel coming out. It's still not going to reach our daily consumption. However, we can say that there is some hope when it comes to oil in the country. We saw that crude oil output is rising. We are hoping that truly work is being done on our refineries and we will see it fully functional, refining fuel out. We are also putting our bets on Dangote refinery and what it will be able to bring out for us. Maybe to a large extent, I will say there is some sort of hope when it comes to oil in the country. A little bit, you can't tell until we start seeing it delivering. But what about the value of our currency? We know very well that if it's not well, it affects every other thing. It affects every other thing in the country. What are we going to do about it? This is where I'm waiting to see what this administration will do. So for the first 1 year, of course, it's not a pass, it's a very big X for Tinubu's administration. We'll just have to wait 3 more years to go and see what it means for us.
Rachel, I guess we'll continue with the scorecard later during Nigeria now, because I think it's worth evaluating, not just the president, his ministers, his cabinet as a whole. I think it's worth evaluating. Still on Daily Sun newspaper, we have confusion as 17 Cross River Assembly members in Speaker, and still Speaker says I am BEM. You can find detail of that on page 6. Vice President Shetima inaugurates Christian Pilgrim Board. You can find detail of that on page 26. Chinese kill female worker in Abia. Youth protests as soldier shoots one. Reps query ministry over $100 million malaria control project. We can find detail of that on inside the paper. Policeman killed, 5 others injured as traders security agent clash in Jos Market. Well, you look detail of that on page 5. And on May 29, government directs ministers and others to observe low-key anniversary. Says tackling insecurity remains top priority. Downside of the paper, we also have Rivers earmark $100 million to revive Songea Farm and others. You can find more detail of that inside the paper. We have a picture story looking at the Tinubu's first anniversary in Abuja yesterday, where we can see some of the ministers in attendance over there, and that's all on Daily Sun newspaper.
On Nigerian Tribune, over 380 Nigerians kidnapped in January, report from to forward security-related resolutions to NSA. Jonathan Atiku Sambo Wabara PDP governors of 152-member National Campaign Council for Edo election. The big story 1 year is campaign's hardship unintended. A statement from the federal government. Ministers apologize to Nigerians, says Tinubu laying foundation for nation's growth. Details can be found on page 2. CBN directs BDCs to reapply for license. Federal government prohibits money ritual and smoking scenes in North. Tight security at Kano Assembly Emirate Council bill can be found on page 2. On security, we are not terrorism. Defense headquarters replies Katsina's governor. Asks him to substantiate allegations. Details can be found on page 3. On minimum wage, labor pay at 497,000 naira as federal government private sector settle for 57,000 naira. Details can be found on page 2. Praying man drowns at Lagos beach, a sick body. Court grants Abakari 2 weeks bail for murder. You can find details on page 2, and that's all the news on Nigerian Tribune.
Right, let's take a look at New Telegraph newspaper. Emirates stakeholders predict major shift in Nigerian market dynamics. Seek urgent resolution by visa restriction. More detail found in the paper. Libyan order BDCs to meet new capital in December. You can find that on page 8. And on Senate asks the federal government to restore power to the Northeast, and Nigerian passengers NCAA militates in Turkish airline union field on page 8. And the issue Labour Party crisis, ex-NL President Omar heads transition committee. Court admits Abba Kyari 50 million naira bill for 2 weeks. You can find that on page 2 and 6. The LG polls mere coronation of ruling party's candidate. This is coming from the INEC chairman, urges us to allow the SIECs to operate independently. Says some SIECs constitute on election if dissolved after. You can find more detail on page 4. Tinubu calls for regional integration to trade ties in Africa. Passengers domestication of democracy for the country. Why UK vaccine through Nigerian student invalidated visa. 10% pregnant women languishing in Benue IDP camps. This is coming from the UNHCR. We hope that Benue will be looking to do something concerning people living in the IDPs. Assembly Speaker cite financial mismanagement. More detail found on page 28. Defense headquarters to Katsina governor substantial allegation of troops' involvement in terrorism. You can find more detail of what transpired there. And on the minimum wage, Labour shift ground slashes proposal to 500,000 naira as federal government stick to 57,000 naira. Looking at it from 54. Okay, federal government stick to the 54,000 naira, private sector settle for 57,000 naira. More detail found on page 2. Study link fish oil supplements to heart stroke risks. More detail found on page 6. And we have a picture story on the front page of the paper. You can do well to get a paper, read more of the detail of any other story that is of interest to you.
On the Nation newspaper, how 386 were rescued from Sambisa troops stay in forest. You can find details on page 4. Judges okay end of election petition before inauguration. Emir of Kano Bayero hails Awujale's leadership style. First Lady empowers women in fabric business. Details can be found on page 3. Tinubu in support of autonomy for council says Akume Idris, it's low-key anniversary. There's progress, says Bagudu. You can start with the details on the front page and continue on page 2. 60 Nigerian students sent out of UK after expulsion from varsity. Details can be found on page 20. The big story on the Nation newspaper, Forex crisis, BDCs to recapitalize, reapply in CBN reform plan. Apex Bank rejects operation of foreign currency dealers, street trading of Forex outlawed. And we have a highlight, guidelines take effect from June 3rd. BDCs are barred from opening foreign accounts, banks others restricted from owning licenses. BDCs can source Forex from diverse sources. BDCs free to collaborate with banks and issue prepaid debit cards. BDCs cannot accept deposits or grant loans, and operators classified into tiers 1 and 2. You can start with the details on the front page and continue on page 2. Government labor shift grounds in minimum wage talks. Government offer 57,000 naira. Labor is standing on 497,000 naira. President for Debbie's inauguration. Mohammed is FRSC Corps Marshal. Details can be found on page 3, and that's all the news on the Nation newspaper.
All right, let's take a look at the Voice of Liberty newspaper. And on the Voice of Liberty, why Tinubu's first anniversary will be low-key. More detail can be found in the paper. This is coming from the Information Minister. Abba Kyari granted bail after 27 months in detention. And the big story on the paper, economic hardship, social chaos looms. This is coming from the ACF warning. The foremost northern group, the Ariwa Consultative Forum, has warned that the country might witness social chaos across the country, particularly in the northern region due to the incessant biting economic hardship. More detail found in the paper. Tinubu appoint new FRSC Corps Marshal and CEO. And on the escalating insecurity, the House of Reps raised concern over federal government's failure to implement resolutions. May 30th Biafra Day celebration, sacrosanct must hold. This is coming from MASOP. More detail found on the paper. And the issue of fuel subsidy, petrol price surges by 176% as inflation bites Nigerians harder. More detail can be found inside the paper. But before we move further with the paper review, We would love to take a time out, quite a lot to chew, and also we would love to hear your own feedback. What do you feel about the move that the federal government has made concerning the minimum wage, shifting it from 54,000 naira to 57,000 naira? As well, we're also seeing where the presidency is begging Nigerians to be patient with the hardship, as they promise that the celebration for the 1 year in office is going to be on the low key. So we would love to hear what are your own views concerning all of this. Please do remember to drop it on our Facebook. Stay tuned with us. We'll be right back after this time out.
Make your everyday informative, make your everyday count. Know your world, daily affairs, national and international, with authentic news events as they unfold on Global News and Zoom on Nigeria, Monday to Friday at 1 p.m.
Welcome back. If you're just tuning in, it's still the Dailies. We have been looking at some of the big stories on the paper, where we are seeing the defense headquarters is actually replying Castina governor, where he is saying that they are making the profits out of terrorism in the country, in the state actually. And as well, we are seeing that the people living in the IDP camps, especially women and children, are complaining of malnutrition, which we feel that the Benue government need to look into that as well. And then we're also seeing the 1 year of the Tinubu's administration, which they said they would celebrate it on a low key. So quite a number of stories on the paper. We will love to hear your own views and your contribution concerning any of the story that is of interest to you. I still have Rachel with me in the studio. Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome, Sarah.
All right, let's take a look at the next paper.
On First News newspaper, Tinubu removes Wike's ally after protest appoints replacement. Tinubu attracted foreign investment, reduced inflation in first year, statement coming from the SGF Akume. Obasanjo urges Africa, retain democracy, make it our own. APC fires shot Obi Atiku, desperate for presidency in 2027, can't be trusted. Teesside University expels Nigerian student amid Naira woes. Kano Emirate Council law advances to first reading. The big story, Cross River Assembly rocked. Chaos as lawmakers impeach Speaker amid corruption allegation. DSS police take over Assembly complex. Ayembe Kick says, I remain Speaker. News of my impeachment fate. And then we have a picture story where we can see a tumultuous scene at the Cross River State House of Assembly during the impeachment of the Speaker, Elved Ekom Ayembe, by the lawmakers on Wednesday. This happened yesterday. Still on First News newspaper, Abba Kyari gets bail after 27 months in detention for drug-related charges. Lukman's hat-trick secures Europa League final triumph for Atalanta. CBN implements sweeping changes, revamps guidelines for bureau de change operators. Nigerian government bans movies featuring money rituals. And that's all the news on First News newspaper.
All right, let's take a look at the next paper, which is Nigerian News Direct. Tinubu makes fresh appointments at the NOSDRA, FRSC, and others. More detail found on page 3. Rivers investment haven for prospective investors, coming from Governor Fubara. Over 2,822 entrepreneurs to benefit from 1 billion naira Ogun operational grants. Lagos State government BOI launched 1 billion naira funding initiative for NMSMEs. And the big story is on 1 year anniversary, Tinubu ministers to present scorecard. President has laid foundation for sustainable progress and prosperity in 1 year. This is coming from the Secretary of the Government. More detail found on page 3. Regional bodies integration key to strengthening intra-African trade, coming from the federal government. Two-story structure collapses in Lagos community during heavy downpour. You can find more on page 13. We're already in that time of the year where we begin to see various buildings collapsing. If it's not in Lagos, it's in Abuja or it's in another part of the country. So I hope this will be a proper time for people who are living in such buildings. Just look out for the signs so that you don't end up in there, or if you have the means, you can actually pack out of such apartment, because we know the rain this year is going to be heavy, whether we admit it or not. So we have to be prepared for that. You can find more detail of that on page 30. We have a picture story as well. You can do well to get the paper and read more detail of any of this story that is of interest to you.
On the Matrix newspaper, the big story: new minimum wage, federal government labor negotiate deadlock. Labor backs down, reduces demand to 497,000 naira. Rejects federal government's fresh 57,000 naira wage proposal. Ahead of ultimatum, Soludo sets up committee on minimum wage and others. On the investment responsible for Nigeria's dwindling oil production output, statement coming from the federal government. Nigeria's Lookman scores hat-trick to guide Atlanta to Europa League's victory. Crisis rocks Cross Rivers Assembly, police take over assembly as AMB fights impeachment. You can find details on page 3. Tinubu reassigns Woke as NOSDRA CEO, appoint Asiru as Ogun Osun River Basin MD. You can find details on page 3. Court grants disgraced Cop Abba Kyari 2-week bail for mother's burial. Still on the paper, Tinubu to attend inauguration of Mahamat Devi as Chad's president Thursday. Expert brainstorm on guidelines for fintechs in Nigeria. Details can be found on page 9. Tinubu names Shehu Mohammed as new FRSC commercial bill out. You can find details on page 9. And that's all the news on the Matrix newspaper.
On this day newspaper, in new regulatory intervention, CBN orders BDCs to reapply for operating licenses, approves new minimum capital threshold of 2 billion naira, 500 million naira for national and state operators respectively, issues 6 months deadline for compliance. More detail found on page 9. Coming from the LCCI, inflationary pressure, interest rate hike, overheating economy, undermining industrial productivity. And then coming from Fubara, with $28.4 billion GDP comparable to Rwanda, Botswana, rivers open for business. British Prime Minister Sunak announces UK general election for July earlier than expected. Coming from Tinubu, Africa must set up regional standby forces against coup, terrorism, and extremism. ECOWAS parliamentary adopt 3 protocol for smooth operation. Obasanjo wants continent to re-examine its model of democracy. More detail found in the paper. We have 2 picture story on the front page of the paper. You can do well to, go through it and see more detail of any of the story that is of interest to you.
On Sporting Sun newspaper, the big story: fantastic Lookman. Rex Leverkusen, first Africa to score hat-trick. You can start with the details on the front page. Osimhen to sign 7-year Chelsea contract. Details can be found on page 6. Modric signs 1-year contract extension, that is for Real Madrid. Details can be found at the back page. Lewis will be at Barca next season. Nunes hints at Liverpool on happiness. Details can be found on page 3. Why Chelsea sacked Pochettino, coach management had disagreement over key decision. Players thank him on social media. Details can be found on page 2. CR7 leads world's top 10 highest paid athlete of 2024. Kevin De Bruyne to join Messi in Major League Soccer. Heavy downpour forces Golden Eaglet match postponement. Game now holds today. Details can be found on the back page. Schumacher family awarded 200,000 euros in compensation over AI interview. Details can be found at the back. Patron does all the news on Sporting Sun newspaper.
Right, on Business Day newspaper, Nigerians $1 trillion transaction to get new AI-based defense. BOI, that's talking about Bank of Industry, Nigeria's oldest financier, posts biggest ever profit. More detail found inside the paper. Africa's most productive oil asset gets no love from investors, where we have Seplat ExxonMobil misses another deadline. And we have on the rising poverty slows Nigerians' voyage to clean cooking. More detail found on page 14 and 19. Tinubu's minister to account for 1 year in office starting today. You can look forward to that on page 29 of the Business Day newspaper. And I think that is all on the business and also how far we can go on the program this morning. Thank you, Rachel, for
You're
joining
welcome, Seve.
And also thank you to our viewers and our supporters for making our time to watch the dailies. We look forward again to doing this tomorrow. To have a great day ahead.